The last thing Daniel Carter remembered before the blast was laughter, not the warm kind. No, this laughter was brittle, hollow, a cruel, desperate sound that broke against crumbling walls, where men gripped rifles with fingers gone slack, tossing grim jokes back and forth like live grenades, as if humor could hold death at bay. Outside, Fallujah's sun burned white and merciless. Inside, the house reeked of sweat, gun oil, and fear. Dust hung in the stale air, floating like tiny ghosts. Matthews was the loudest, always was, tapping a beat on his helmet with 2 fingers, wearing that cocky, crooked grin like armor. When we get back, he said, "First round's on me. Second, too. Hell, maybe even the third." The explosion swallowed the rest. Daniel never even heard the blast, only felt it, a brutal punch of heat, noise, smoke, and concrete that tore him off his feet and slammed him into a wall. His vision shattered into blackness. When the world snapped back, it was chaos. His ears screamed in silence. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Somehow he moved, fingers clawing across rubble and broken glass, crawling toward the only thing that mattered. Matthews sprawled and still, the grin wiped clean, blood pooling dark and wide beneath him, soaking into the dirt. "Matthews," Daniel rasped. "Matthews." No answer, only the clatter of gear, only the distant, broken echo of laughter that wasn't laughter anymore. And somewhere deep inside Daniel, something cracked, split wide open, and from that jagged fault line, rage, guilt, and helplessness poured in, filling him up until there was no room left for anything else. Daniel Carter died in Fallujah that day. The body that came home looked the same, but inside, only ash and smoke. Daniel's apartment smelled like cold coffee and old regret. The blinds were shut tight, sealing the morning into a sickly gray gloom. Takeout boxes littered the coffee table. A half-empty bottle of whiskey leaned against a stack of unread mail. Daniel sat hunched on the couch, elbows on his knees, head bowed low, breathing slow and shallow like a man trying to disappear. Another nightmare. His T-shirt clung to his back with cold sweat. His fists throbbed from clenching all night. The TV flickered across the room, static hissing, late-night commercials droning. Bright, smiling faces sold toothpaste and kitchen gadgets while laugh tracks chuckled from empty sitcoms. Daniel watched without seeing. His mind was still there, still dragging Matthews into a Humvee, still feeling blood dry on his hands, still hearing the last desperate rattle of a breath. "Ground yourself," the therapist had said. 5 things you can see, for you can touch. He didn't bother. What was the point? His body was here, but the rest of him, the rest was still bleeding out half a world away. The phone buzzed. He ignored it, buzzed again. Insistent. With a sigh, he grabbed it. A text from Lisa, his sister. "Dad's birthday dinner tonight. 6 p.m. You coming? He misses you." Daniel stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. "Tell him I'm sorry." "I can't." "Delete." "Maybe. I'll see." "Send." Lying was easier than explaining. He tossed the phone down and leaned back, staring up at the water stain creeping across the ceiling like a spreading bruise. Once, he would have gotten up, cleaned the place, showered, showed up with a smile and a cheap gift, pretending he was whole. Now, just breathing took everything he had. A loud crash from the alley jolted him upright. Instinct slammed into him, heart pounding, muscles tight, scanning for threats. For a rifle. For Matthews at a 6. Nothing. Just a knocked-over trash can. A stray cat disappearing into the shadows. Daniel pressed a shaking hand to his chest, willing his pulse to slow. It never did. He lived wired too tight, a grenade without a pin, one bad second away from blowing apart. He knew the truth. The war was over, but the enemy had moved in, set up camp inside his skull, and there was no winning that kind of fight. He slumped back onto the couch and buried his face in his hands. Maybe he'd make it to the dinner. Maybe he wouldn't. Did it even matter? Out there, the world kept spinning. Birthdays, promotions, baby showers. In here, Daniel Carter was still bleeding out in a dirty house half a world away. and no one could see it. He should call Lisa, make some excuse, say he was sick. But when Daniel picked up the phone again, his thumb hovered and stilled. What if he did go, just show his face for an hour, shake his father's hand, nod through the polite conversation, make his family believe for one night that he was still Daniel Carter, the one who used to laugh too loud and take too many dares, the one who could sit through a dinner without breaking into a cold sweat. Maybe he owed them that. Maybe he owed himself that. Cursing under his breath, Daniel shoved the phone into his pocket and moved toward the bedroom. He dug through a heap of clothes, pulling on jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. His boots were still by the door, scarred, dusty, familiar. When he laced them up, he could almost pretend he was gearing up for another mission. Almost. At the last second, he grabbed the battered leather jacket hanging from the chair. Heavy, shielding, like armor. Keys, wallet, phone, rituals, checks. He stepped outside. The daylight hit him like a shove. Too bright, too raw. He flinched and pulled the jacket tighter around him, head ducked low, like he could shrink himself small enough to be invisible. The sidewalk buzzed with life. Strollers clattering, teenagers laughing, a street musician plucking at a battered guitar. The normalcy felt obscene. How could they all move so easily through the world, when every step he took felt like wading through broken glass? The grocery store was only 3 blocks away, but Daniel's pulse was already thrumming by the time he reached it. He needed to pick up something, anything, to bring to dinner, a bottle of whiskey. Maybe his dad would appreciate that more than another goddamn Hallmark card. He stepped through the sliding glass doors, and the world narrowed to a pinpoint. The grocery store was a battlefield of a different kind. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, drilling into his skull. The rush of carts scraping linoleum, the beep of scanners, the low roar chatter. It all blended into a sickening, pulsing noise. Daniel clutched the basket, knuckles white. 5 things you can see, for you can touch. He scanned wildly, cereal boxes, a crying baby, a woman arguing into her phone, neon sale signs screaming for attention, a kid kicking a shelf of canned goods. Too much, too fast. His chest tightened, ribs squeezing like a fist. He forced himself to move, every step mechanical, past the bakery, past the produce, toward the liquor aisle. Focus. Mission. Get the bottle. Get out. He turned a corner and froze. A stack of boxes teetered on the edge of an employee's cart, and as he passed, one slipped and hit the ground with sharp, echoing bang. Daniel's body reacted before his mind did. He dropped low, instinctively reaching for his sidearm, but there was no rifle, no threat, only a startled teenage stock boy staring at him, mouth open. The air closed around Daniel like a vice. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. He wasn't in Ohio anymore. He was back in Fallujah. Smoke, screams, blood in the dirt. Matthew's lifeless eyes staring up at him. "Sir?" A voice said too close, too loud. Daniel snapped around, fists raised. A woman in a store uniform recoiled. Hands up. "Sir, are you okay?" "You're scaring people." He stumbled backward, basket clattering to the floor. Whispers swirled around him. Is he drunk? On drugs? Some crazy vet, probably. Heat flooded his face. Shame, fury, helplessness. He bolted, shoving past stunned shoppers, to the automatic doors into blistering sunlight. The moment he hit the parking lot, he doubled over, hands on his knees, dragging in great lungfuls of air. His heart wouldn't slow. He pressed his palms against his skull, tried to squeeze the images out, trying to force the past back into whatever dark corner it clawed free from. But it didn't listen. It never did. Minutes or hours passed before he was able to straighten up, blinking against the sting of sweat and humiliation in his eyes. Across the street, a mother ushered her child away, casting him a nervous glance. Daniel staggered toward his truck, fumbled the key into the ignition with shaking hands, slammed the door shut, locking himself inside. Safe, or something close to it. He sat there until the adrenaline wore off and the crushing exhaustion settled in its place. Finally, he pulled out his phone and opened Lisa's text again. Instead of answering, he typed a new message. Can't make it. Sorry. He hit send. The shame burned, but he was too tired to fight it. He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. Maybe he wasn't meant for normal life. Maybe whatever piece of him that could have come back home was buried with Matthews under that endless desert sky. For a long time, Daniel sat in the truck, the world moving on without him, and for the first time, the thought crept in, maybe he needed help. Real help, not a self-help book, not another night of whiskey and lies. Maybe therapy. The word felt poisonous in his mouth. Weak, broken, but something deeper, the same part of him that had survived the blast, survived the years afterward, whispered that maybe surviving wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to try living, even if he had no idea how, even if it terrified him more than war ever had. The Veterans Affairs Clinic smelled like antiseptic and hopelessness. Daniel sat stiffly in a plastic chair, tapping his knee with one restless hand, wishing he were anywhere else. The waiting room was full of faded posters. It's okay to ask for help. You are not alone. But the hollow stares of the men around him told a different story. No one here believed those words. They were just killing time until they could get their prescriptions filled and go back to their cages. Daniel was halfway through debating whether bolt when the door creaked open. Daniel Carter? He glanced up. The woman standing there wasn't what he expected. No crisp lab coat. No clipboard tucked to her chest like a shield. Just jeans, boots, and a fitted black blazer. Practical, unassuming, dangerous, in a way he couldn't quite name. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid over one shoulder. A jagged scar traced a pale line down her left forearm, half hidden by the jacket sleeve. Her eyes were dark, direct, steady. They didn't flinch when they met his. Dr. Reyes, she said, come on back. Daniel rose slowly, every instinct screaming caution. He followed her down a narrow hallway lined with scuffed floors and peeling paint, the walls closing in tighter with every step. She led him into a small office. No diplomas cluttered the walls. No ticking clock to measure how badly he was wasting her time. Just 2 chairs, a battered desk, and a tiny window cracked open to let in the outside air. Dr. Reyes dropped into one chair and gestured at the other. Daniel stayed standing. You don't want to be here, she said casually, leaning back. Daniel crossed his arms. What gave it away? The way you're standing, like you're waiting for an ambush. His mouth twitched, half a smirk, half a snarl. Maybe she wasn't as clueless as he thought. Reyes watched him without judgment. You can leave if you want. I'm not going to hold you hostage. Daniel didn't move. Part of him wanted to bolt. Another part. The part that woke up at 3 a.m. gasping for breath. The part that couldn't even survive a trip to the goddamn grocery store. Knew he'd be back in his chair eventually, whether it was today or tomorrow or next month. He dropped into the chair with a heavy sigh, sprawling backward like he didn't give a shit. Like he wasn't seconds from coming apart at the seams. Reyes laced her fingers together. Okay, Daniel, let's make a deal. He raised an eyebrow. You don't bullshit me, she said. And I won't bullshit you. He snorted. Sound like a scam. Probably is, she said dryly, but it's the only one I'm offering. For a long, taut moment, they stared at each other, measuring, testing. Finally, Daniel muttered, Fine. Reyes nodded, like she won a hand in poker. Good. Then let's start with this. You're not broken. Daniel stiffened. You're injured, she said, voice low but fierce. Like someone with a gunshot wound. You don't tell a guy bleeding out that he's weak, because he's hurting. You patch him up. You help him heal. He looked away. The words scraped against something raw inside him. And yeah, Reyes continued, some wounds don't heal clean. Some leave scars. She tapped her forearm, where the scar peeked from her sleeve. Daniel couldn't stop himself from glancing at it. What happened? He asked, before he could stop himself. She shrugged. I was a combat medic. Afghanistan. Thought I could outrun shrapnel. A ghost of a smile. I was wrong. The office grew quiet. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt the faintest flicker of something he barely recognized. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. He shifted in his chair. So what now? Now, Reyes said, we get to work. The VA's service dog program was Daniel's idea of hell. Too many people, too many eyes, too many memories clawing at the inside of his skull. But Reyes had been firm. You're not ready for a full-time job yet. You need something to tether you to reality. Something that doesn't expect you to be perfect. He hated how much sense that made. The trainer, Elena, was waiting by the kennels. A wiry woman in her 50s with callous hands and a no-bullshit glare. Daniel liked her immediately. You Carter? She barked. He nodded. She jerked a thumb over her shoulder. Got a candidate for you. Fair warning, he's an asshole. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Perfect. We'll get along great. Elena led him to a side yard. The dog, lying in the dirt, was a wreck. Big, scarred, one ear torn halfway off. Thick patches of fur missing from old burns. He looked up when Daniel approached, and his dark eyes were flat, assessing, empty. Name's Rex, Elena said. Afghanistan like you. Served 3 tours. Left behind when his handler got rotated out. Daniel crouched carefully. Rex growled, low in warning. Daniel didn't flinch. I get it, he said softly. Elena watched him for a beat, then shrugged. No promises. He's got his own demons. So do I, Daniel said. For a long moment, man and dog stared at each other. 2 battered soldiers marooned by the same war. Then, cautiously, Daniel held out his hand. Rex sniffed it, growled again, but didn't bite. Progress. Elena grunted. Better than most people get on the first day. Daniel stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. What's the next step? You take him home, Elena said, if he lets you. Rex rose slowly to his feet, shaking dust from his mangy coat. Daniel met his gaze. Come on, soldier, he said under his breath. Let's figure this shit out. Rex huffed, a sound halfway between a bark and a grunt, and trotted after him. Daniel didn't realize he was smiling until he felt the unfamiliar pull of muscles in his face. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Rex didn't trust him. Daniel could see it in every stiff step, every sideways glance. The ride home was silent, save for the hum of the old truck and the soft panting from the passenger seat. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the dog, who sat tense and rigid, as if waiting for betrayal. They understood each other too well, already. When they reached Daniel's apartment complex, a tired building with peeling paint and rusted stair rails, Rex hesitated at the door, sniffing the cracked concrete. Yeah, Daniel muttered, unlocking the door. Not much to look at, is it? Inside, Rex circled cautiously, nose low to the ground. The stench of loneliness must have been obvious even to him. Daniel kicked aside a pile of unopened mail and empty pizza boxes, clearing a path. Home sweet home, he said. Rex stopped at the couch, staring at it like it might explode. Daniel dropped his keys onto the counter and rubbed his face. Rules are simple, he said, voice hoarse. You don't bite me, I don't kick you out. Rex huffed again, that same gruff sound. Daniel collapsed onto the couch with a groan, closing his eyes. He half expected Rex to keep his distance, to find a corner and hunker down like a prisoner. Instead, after a long moment, he felt a weight settle near his feet. When he cracked an eye open, Rex was curled there, still wary, but closer than before. Daniel stared at him. For a long time, neither moved. Then, so quietly it was almost a thought slipping loose, Daniel whispered, You're not the only one who got left behind. The nightmares didn't stop, but that night, for the first time in what felt like years, Daniel woke to something different. Not the endless free fall of smoke and screaming, but weight, solid, grounding. Rex, pressed against his leg, breathing slow and steady. Daniel lay still in the darkness, heart hammering from whatever half-formed terror had chased him into waking. He didn't reach for the gun under his pillow. He didn't need to. He just listened to the dog's breathing. In, out, like an anchor, like a heartbeat not his own. He let the rhythm pull him back down into a dreamless, merciful sleep. The next morning, sunlight actually made it past the blinds. Daniel stood in the kitchen, bleary-eyed, nursing a mug of burnt coffee. Rex sat nearby, gnawing on a battered tennis ball Daniel didn't even know he owned. "You're making yourself at home, huh?" Daniel muttered. Rex ignored him, tail thumping lazily against the floor. Later that day, Daniel had his first therapy session with Reyes. He almost didn't go, the thought of dragging himself across town. Sitting in that chair again, unspooling his guts in front of the stranger, it twisted something ugly in his stomach. But when he grabbed his keys, Rex barked sharply at the door like he knew, like he was telling him, "Move. Don't get stuck." Daniel exhaled slowly. Yeah, he grumbled. "I'm going." At the clinic, Reyes didn't greet him with fake cheer or probing sympathy. She just nodded at the chair. Daniel slumped into it, arms crossed, heart armored. "So," Reyes said, tapping her pen against a battered notebook, "you met Rex?" "Yeah." "How's it going?" Daniel shrugged. "He doesn't trust me." "Good," Reyes said. He blinked. "Good." "It means he's smart," she said simply. "Trust isn't free. It's earned. Same goes for you." He frowned. Reyes leaned back in her chair. "Tell me about yesterday." Daniel hesitated. How could he explain it? The way the store lights had buzzed like artillery shells. The way the screaming toddler had morphed into something deadly in his mind. The way he had almost hit someone just because they touched his shoulder. He gritted his teeth. Shame flooded him. "I lost it," he muttered. "In public." Reyes nodded like she'd heard 100 stories, just like his. "And then I ran. And now—" Daniel shifted. "I'm here." "Exactly," Reyes said. "You didn't run from this." He scowled. "Doesn't feel like a victory." "That's because you're still bleeding out. But the fact that you showed up anyway—" She smiled, small, grim, but real. "It means the wound is starting to scab over." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But when he left the clinic an hour later, there was a strange sensation gnawing at the edges of his mind. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the tiniest crack of light through the wreckage. And sometimes that was enough. It arrived on a Tuesday. No knock, no signature. Just a plain envelope shoved through the mail slot, lying there on the cracked tile like a loaded gun. Daniel noticed it when he came home from therapy, Rex trotting at his side. Something about the envelope, the way it sat, the way his name was scrawled across it in shaky, childlike handwriting, made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He picked it up carefully. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel's breath hitched. It was a girl, maybe 12, maybe younger. Dark hair, shy smile. Dust clinging to her clothes like a second skin. He knew that face. He knew it like a blade buried in bone. She was from Fallujah, the street where it had all gone to hell. The day Matthews died, the day Daniel lost more than just a friend. The day a decision had splintered him into 1,000 broken pieces. Beneath the photo, scrawled in blocky, uneven letters, were 2 words. "Remember me?" Daniel staggered back a step, the room tilting sideways. Rex barked once, sharp, worried. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. He dropped the photo like it burned him, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. No, this wasn't happening. He had seen her fall, had seen the blood bloom on the dust, had told himself, nothing could be done. It wasn't your fault. Now, a ghost was knocking on his door, and Daniel didn't know if he had the strength to open it. Later, after the panic ebbed, he sat on the floor, the photo on the coffee table in front of him like a trial exhibit. He couldn't stop staring at it. Was it a threat? A plea? A mistake? Why now after all these years? Rex rested his head on Daniel's knee, heavy and steady. Daniel threaded his fingers through the dog's fur, grounding himself. If someone had sent this, they knew where he lived. They knew who he was. And they weren't finished with him yet. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, lights off, scanning the parking lot for movement. Every pair of headlights made his muscles tense. Every creak of the old building set his pulse racing. By morning, he felt hollowed out, a shell of meat and bone, barely stitched together. He skipped therapy, ignored 3 texts from Reyes, ignored a call from Elena at the VA. Isolation wrapped around him like a second skin, familiar, seductive. It would be easy to stay in the darkness, to pretend none of it had happened, to pretend he didn't care. But the photo burned in his mind. The girl's smile, the blood, the unbearable possibility. What if she lived? What if she blames you? By evening, Daniel was pacing like a caged animal. Rex followed him room to room, whining low in his throat. Finally, Daniel stopped, staring down at the dog. "You want me to do something, huh?" he muttered. "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Rex just stared at him, steady, unjudging. Daniel grabbed the envelope again, flipping it over, hunting for any clue. Nothing. No stamp. No postmark. But there was a faint smell he hadn't noticed before, smoke and something sharper underneath, like engine oil. It wasn't random. Someone had delivered this. Maybe they were still close. Maybe they wanted him to find them. The thought made Daniel's gut churn. But he knew, deep down, past all the fear, that he couldn't outrun this. Not anymore. The next day, he made a decision. He dug out his old gear from the closet, the battered boots, the frayed duffel bag, the uniform he hadn't been able to throw away. He didn't put it on. That part of his life was dead. But he needed the mindset, the mission focus. He packed light, water, a flashlight, a first aid kit, the Glock he hadn't fired since leaving the service. And the photo, a map of the city sat on the kitchen table, marked with red circles. The VA center, the park where the homeless vets hung out, the dive bars near the bus station. If someone was watching him, they had to have been close. He wasn't going to sit and wait anymore. Before he left, he knelt by Rex. "You stay here," he said, voice thick. "Guard the fort." Rex whined, tail thudding against the floor, but stayed put when Daniel stood and slung the duffel over his shoulder. Daniel glanced at the scar dog, his first real connection to this world in years. He hesitated. Then, as if afraid the words might vanish if he thought about them too long, he said, "Thanks, buddy." And then he stepped into the night, heart hammering, shadows swallowing him whole. He didn't know if he was walking toward redemption or destruction, but either way, he was done hiding. The city felt different that night. It wasn't just the dark or the cold bite of early winter creeping down the empty sidewalks. It was the way the streets breathed, whispered, watched. Daniel moved like he used on patrol, head low, eyes scanning windows, rooftops, alley mouths. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but tonight, every nerve screamed otherwise. The Glock was tucked at the small of his back. Not drawn yet, not unless he had to. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for answers. And maybe, deep down, for absolution. The first few hours turned up nothing. Bars with sticky floors and glazed-eyed drunks. Shelters where too many faces looked just like his. Hollow, lost, barely clinging to the wreckage. No sign of whoever sent the letter. No clues. Just a slow grind of fatigue and rising frustration. By midnight, Daniel sat slumped on a bus bench, staring at the cracked pavement. Maybe this was stupid. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe he was chasing ghosts. He rubbed his hands over his face, feeling the grit of exhaustion. Then footsteps. Soft, hesitant. Daniel tensed, instinct flaring. His hand drifted toward the Glock, just in case. A figure approached from the mouth of an alley across the street. Small, hooded, carrying something tucked close to their chest. Daniel stood slowly, every muscle ready to snap. The figure hesitated, then stepped into the weak pool of a street lamp. A kid, maybe 17. Skinny, bruised-looking, in a torn army surplus jacket 3 sizes too big. Their eyes met, and the kid flinched like Daniel had hit him. The kid glanced around, then in a sudden burst of movement, tossed something onto the sidewalk and bolted into the dark. Daniel sprinted across the street, boots hammering the asphalt. But by the time he reached the alley, the kid was gone, swallowed by the maze of the city. Breathing hard, Daniel turned back to the object on the ground. It was a second envelope, smaller than the first. He crouched, heart hammering, and picked it up. Inside was a folded scrap of paper. One word, written in the same jagged hand. Tomorrow. And beneath it, an address. An abandoned train yard on the outskirts of town. Daniel stood there a long time, the paper crumpled in his fist. Tomorrow. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished. And if he didn't show up, if he kept running, he'd never know the truth. He didn't sleep that night. He barely breathed. He sat by the window with Rex at his side, watching the stars shift across the bruised sky, waiting for dawn, waiting. The train yard was a skeleton of iron and rust. Long dead tracks choked by weeds. Graffiti-scrawled boxcars sagging on broken wheels. The wind carried a metallic stench of old oil and rain-soaked steel. Daniel parked a block away and approached on foot, boots silent on the wet gravel. The Glock was strapped under his jacket. Not drawn. Not yet. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew he couldn't walk away. The address led him to a half-collapsed maintenance shed near the center of the yard. No lights. No sound. Daniel circled wide, instincts flaring, checking sightlines, cover points. Old habits. Lifelines. When he was sure it wasn't an ambush, he approached the door. It creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and freezing. Dust motes danced in the faint gray light filtering through shattered windows. In the center of the floor, illuminated by a hole in the ceiling, was a chair. And in the chair, slumped and shivering, was the kid from the night before. Daniel froze, Glock half drawn. The kid looked up, bruised eyes, split lip, hands zip-tied to the chair arms. Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't a setup. It was a message. And as Daniel stepped closer, he saw the kid's chest rise and fall in shallow, panic breaths. Taped to the front of the kid's jacket was a third note. Daniel ripped it free and unfolded it. It said, "You failed her. How many others will you abandon?" Something snapped inside Daniel. Not rage, something colder. Purpose. He crouched in front of the kid, lowering the Glock. "It's okay," he said, voice steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." The kid flinched anyway, like he didn't believe it. Daniel pulled a knife from his belt and carefully sliced through the zip ties. As he did, he saw it, tattooed on the kid's wrist, half hidden by the jacket sleeve. A small black star. Daniel's breath caught. He'd seen that symbol before. Years ago. Spray-painted on the walls of a bombed-out village in Fallujah. A rebel group. One that didn't just fight soldiers. They used civilians. Children. Daniel's hands tightened on the knife. Was this a trap after all? Or something worse? The kid sagged forward, coughing. Daniel grabbed his shoulders, steadying him. "Who sent you?" Daniel demanded, voice low, urgent. "Why me?" The kid shook his head, tears streaking dirty cheeks. "They said you killed her," he gasped. "Said you had to pay." Daniel's vision tunneled. "Who said?" The kid shuddered. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "My brother." And Daniel felt the bottom drop out of the world. Because he remembered now. The man who had screamed at them from the rooftops during the ambush. The sniper who had marked them. The one Daniel had shot through the heart. The girl on the street had been his sister. And now, years later, the man's surviving family had found him, tracked him across continents and years. Not to kill him. Not yet. To break him first. Daniel staggered back, the photo burning in his pocket. The past wasn't dead. It was alive, and it wanted him to bleed. Daniel backed away from the kid, his breath loud in the dead air. The train yard around him seemed to warp, rails twisting like broken bones, boxcars sagging into the earth like graves. He pressed a hand against the rusted wall to steady himself. His mind flashed. The alleyway, the little girl bleeding out, the sniper on the roof, screaming in Arabic, Matthews dying with a hole in his chest. All this time, Daniel had thought the ghosts lived inside him, but they had faces, names, vengeance. He stared at the kid, now free but crumpled on the floor, shivering in the cold. A weapon. That's what the brother had turned him into, just like Daniel had once been. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. City sounds, oblivious to what was happening here. Daniel turned in a slow circle, scanning the shadows. It felt wrong, incomplete. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He needed answers. He needed a plan. And most of all, he needed to get this kid out before someone decided to finish the job. "Come on," Daniel said roughly, crouching beside him. The kid flinched again, but this time he let Daniel haul him up. He weighed almost nothing, skin and bone in fear. "You got a name?" Daniel asked as they stumbled toward the door. The kid hesitated. "Sammy," he whispered. "Sammy." Another ghost with a name. Daniel tightened his grip on the boy's arm. He could feel Sammy's heart hammering through the jacket sleeve, as fast and terrified as his own had once been. "We're getting out of here," Daniel muttered. He didn't know where they were going yet. Didn't know what waited for him at the end of this. But he knew one thing. He wasn't running anymore. As he shoved the shed door open, the wind knifed into him, carrying the first flurries of winter snow. The world beyond the train yard looked different, colder, sharper, like it was waiting for him to make a choice. He gritted his teeth, bracing himself, because the war he thought he left behind wasn't over yet. It had only just come home. By the time Daniel got Sammy back to his apartment, it was almost morning. The sun was a weak, bloodless smear across the horizon. He locked the door, pulled the curtains, turned on the old space heater. Sammy huddled on the couch, arms wrapped around his knees. He looked so young in the light, too young to be carrying this kind of hatred, too young to have been dragged into a war that never really ended. Daniel paced the living room like a caged animal. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to strike, to end the threat. But the kid wasn't the enemy. Not really. Sammy was a pawn, just like Daniel had once been. Just like Matthews. Just like the girl bleeding out on that dusty street. The real enemy was older, colder, the past weaponized by grief. He sat heavily across from Sammy, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly. Sammy didn't answer. His eyes were hollow, dark pools of exhausted fear. Daniel leaned forward. "I know what he told you. About me. About what happened." A long pause. "But you weren't there." Finally, Sammy looked up, defiance flickering in his bruised face. "He said you laughed." Daniel recoiled like he'd been slapped. "No," he rasped. "God, no." Sammy's mouth twisted. "He said you shot her. That you smiled." Daniel shook his head, bile rising in his throat. "I tried to save her," he said. "I tried." The memories battered him, blood slick on his hands. Matthews dying feet away, the broken radio hissing static, the villagers screaming. The impossible choice: pull Matthews to safety or reach the girl bleeding out in the dust. He had chosen his brother in arms, and lost them both. Silence stretched thick between them. Finally, Sammy spoke, voice raw and cracking. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. "Good," he said. The boy frowned, confused. Daniel forced a half smile, tired, sad. "It means you're still thinking for yourself." A knock rattled the door. Both Daniel and Sammy jolted. Rex growled low from his post near the hallway. Another knock, louder, insistent. Daniel stood, heart hammering. He checked the peephole. No one. Then a note slid under the door. Daniel stared at it like it was a snake. Finally, he stooped and picked it up. The writing was familiar, jagged, angry. "You have 24 hours. Bring the boy, or we finish what you started." Daniel closed his eyes, breathing through the spike of panic. 24 hours. A lifetime. A death sentence. He looked back at Sammy, who stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. The past hadn't just come for Daniel. It had come for them both. And now Daniel had to make a choice. Run. Fight. Or face the ghost once and for all. Daniel folded the note slowly, deliberately, even though his hands wanted to crumple it. 24 hours. He turned it over, half expecting more. Coordinates, instructions, a name. But there was nothing. Just a threat breathing down his neck. Just a clock, ticking louder in his skull. He moved into the kitchen, pulling open a drawer and fishing out an old burner phone. The one he hadn't touched in months. The one he kept for emergencies. He didn't want to admit he still expected. His fingers hesitated over the keypad. He knew one number by heart. Naomi Reyes. Therapist. Liar. Maybe his only ally left. The phone rang once. Twice. Come on, he muttered under his breath. A click. Daniel. Her voice tight, cautious. He hadn't called her since he'd stormed out of her office weeks ago. Need your help, he said, voice raw. A beat of silence. Then, where are you? He gave her the address. Gave her the shortest version he could. Kid in danger, bad people coming. No time for trust issues now. Only survival. As he hung up, he caught Sammy watching him, small and pale in the big, battered couch. Daniel knelt in front of him, lowering himself to eye level. You trust me? The boy flinched, as if the word itself hurt. Daniel didn't blame him. I'll keep you safe, he said quietly, even if you don't believe me yet. Sammy stared at him, and after a long, terrible pause, he nodded, a small, broken nod. But it was enough. 15 minutes later, Naomi pulled up in a battered Subaru, wearing jeans, boots, and a grim expression that told Daniel everything he needed to know. She believed him. She'd been expecting this day, too. They loaded Sammy into the back seat. Rex followed, eyes sharp and unblinking. As they pulled away, Daniel glanced one last time at the building that had been his prison, his tomb, and, briefly, his shelter. He didn't expect to see it again. And for once, he wasn't afraid, because the real fight was ahead. And this time, he wasn't fighting for himself alone. The city peeled away behind them, gray and indifferent. Ahead, the empty road stretched wide and cold under growing storm. But Daniel's hands were steady on his knees. His breath was even, and when he closed his eyes, he didn't see smoke or blood. He saw a choice. He saw a possibility. He saw a future worth bleeding for. Somewhere out there, the past was waiting for him, and he was ready to meet it head on.
What would happen to Daniel Carter? Watch out for the next episode. Thanks for listening.